Welcome everyone. It's great to see everyone today for the ETQ Reliance Quality Solutions series, the start of a new series. And we're going to start today on supply chain quality, an area that is of utmost interest to a lot of companies these days, given issues with supply chains and suppliers and making sure you've got the right parts at the right time to produce whatever you're producing. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm David Isaacson, VP of Product Marketing for ETQ, and I'm joined by the estimable Tom Barlow, who is, I'm going to get your title wrong, Tom, Superior Strategic Solutions Engineer, right? Excellent. So Tom will join us in a couple of minutes and give us more detail about how to think about supply chain quality. But before we get started, let me first go through the logistics today of the webinar. We are recording this, and so you'll get a copy at the end. All registrants, in fact, will get a copy of the webinar at the end. If you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar widget on the right-hand side of the screen. Put your question in there, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. We'll get to as many questions as we can. So let's take a look at the agenda. First off, I'm going to go through an overview of ETQ. Then Tom will get into a little bit more about ETQ Reliance, which is a quality management system, and really get into looking at the process of managing suppliers. Do a little demonstration of one approach to supply chain management. We'll talk about a couple of organizations who have successfully gotten their arms around how to manage suppliers, and we'll take your questions. So let's start with the overview of ETQ. So one of the things that we think about when we think about quality, this is where we start here is quality management, is that supply chain is just part of the entire product life cycle. I mean, from the initial design of a product through making sure you have the right suppliers with the right materials that you need to build whatever you've designed, through the actual manufacturing process, getting that out to customers, selling it, and then getting feedback customers. We have this entire life cycle that quality impacts. And today we will focus strictly on, well, not strictly on, but primarily on supply chain. But before we get into that, I just want to mention that when you think about supply chain and you think about where ETQ is in that ecosystem, we recently were acquired by Hexagon, and that allows us to work with you and your suppliers even more effectively across the whole quality management spectrum, where you're not only talking about quality assurance or QMS, but you're also now talking about quality control. When those supplier parts are actually on the line and being worked on and being assembled, when you have a problem with that supplier, how do you get that information from the production line through to the quality management system to the supplier, work on a supplier corrective action, make sure that you have the right suppliers if you need to bring somebody new on. I mean, it just makes this ecosystem even that much more extensive and able to meet your needs from a manufacturing perspective on a day-to-day basis. The other thing when you look at supply chain, it's just part of, as I said, part of this whole product life cycle. It's part of what we call the quality journey. And there are so many different quality needs that we try to address and that you need to think about in your day-to-day operations. Whether you're dealing strictly with documents and making sure all your policies and procedures are up to date and everybody's trained on them, whether you're worrying about an audit because you've had some corrective actions and now you need to make sure that you've addressed them appropriately, that's pretty much some of our more basic capabilities with what we call the ignite phase of the journey. Once you start to accelerate and you bring those suppliers in and you now start to look at non-conformances and integration with other systems, and through expanding where you not only are dealing with suppliers, but other capabilities that go beyond the core capabilities of a quality management system. You're getting into environmental integration with MES and ERP and LIMS and quality control, on and on and on. I mean, the way a quality management system touches an organization can be extensive, and that's where you get to this whole transformational point where you've taken this across the enterprise and you're really thinking about how quality is just, you don't even think about it to some degree. It's just part of your day-to-day culture. And whether that's from a risk management perspective or total digital transformation, smart factory, globalizing, or harmonizing globally, making sure that you're producing products regardless of where in the world they're occurring, that they have the same level of quality that you always expect. Just a couple other points about ETQ. First of all, when you think about who uses a quality management system, it cuts across lots of different industries. When I look at the attendee list for today, I see attendees from lots of different vertical markets, whether you're a manufacturer, life sciences, food and beverage, et cetera. You can see that every type of organization really has a use for a quality management system. And here are just some of the customers that ETQ deals with across a broad range of different verticals. And one of the real benefits of this, and what our customers have come to appreciate, is the ability to cross-pollinate, basically, understand what different people in different industries do, and therefore they can learn different techniques and expanded techniques, as opposed to just staying within your vertical and doing what you've always done. This gives you an opportunity to learn, and gives us the opportunity to bring best practices to the market that cross all of these different industries. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to now turn it over to Tom to take us through a bit more detail on ETQ Reliance, our quality management system, and more details on supplier quality management.
Thank you very much, David. I would like to mention one more thing about this slide, just in addition to what you mentioned, and it really speaks to the configurability of our system. David mentioned that we work across many different industries, many different verticals, kind of a horizontal approach. It really speaks to the flexibility of our system because it's the same tool, the same version of the same system that's being used by all these different customers in all these different industries. So literally the system has been able to be configured to meet their specific requirements without customization. And now actually, let's take a moment to talk about the ETQ Reliance product for just a second, as in the form of an introduction to it. ETQ Reliance, if I was asked in an elevator, what is it? It's a flexible workflow-based business process automation platform that comes with 42 pre-configured applications that can be used across different processes, and we'll touch on those in a few moments. But it's also highly flexible, and it sits on one agile platform that's allows for that tremendous amount of configurability. In fact, not only can you configure the system without programming for the existing applications, we also used our own designer tool to pre-configure the out-of-the-box applications. And that being said, you can configure your own applications on the platform. And it's all part of the software as a service cloud native tool. So it's available to you in the cloud. So there's very minimal effort on your part to manage it. It's highly scalable. It's always available, etc. So as David mentioned, we have many different industries that we work with. We've got proven ROI. So more users, more productivity with those users, more knowledgeable users, the power to drive digital transformation. So you're taking your processes and automating them electronically, and you are allowing your whole organization and even extending outside to your suppliers, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, to make sure that they can adapt and have one global platform. And it's also future-proof. So both from a technology perspective, since it's hosted in the cloud using the latest technology, we're always keeping ourselves up to date, our tools up to date with all that information. But also from a process perspective, because of the configurability of our tool, we can essentially be future-proof, because even if you have needs that you can't anticipate today, you can meet those needs with configurability of the platform, whether it's using the configuration capability with existing out-of-the-box applications, or if you want to build your own applications on top of the platform. So as we develop our tool, our newest version is called Reliance NXG, or Next Generation. It's been out for about 2 years or so now, and we focus on 4 pillars. Usability, to make sure that it's extremely easy to access and it's literally pleasant for a user to experience our system every day, minimizing the amount of clicks and effort it takes to get to information they need. We've already touched on the flexibility part. It's highly flexible and it can be configured without programming to meet your own business process requirements. Ensuring visibility, so we have advanced analytics available to allow you to look for trends or analyze processes and pull out a lot of information with business intelligence to really move forward with better business decisions. And then finally, scalability. We have some customers that have tens of thousands of users literally accessing one system, whether it's internal and or external users such as suppliers. So that gives you one platform, one system to manage all your processes with the same look and feel across all the applications as well as the interaction with suppliers. So what is our tool? This is an example of how we package our tool. The stuff in this dark red or maroon color is the core applications. So there are 5 core processes. And if you refer to the slide that David put up before with the different stages of the quality journey, these 5 applications on the left here, the document control, training, audits, corrective action, and change, are the most commonly implemented processes as you go in your quality journey. So it allows you to manage that information sitting on top of the same platform. And then on top of that, we have these different application sets, which contain on average of about 4 additional applications each to manage different processes. So that being said, one more thing that I'd like to mention about the tool itself, since it's a platform, it has 6 powerful capabilities, or we refer to them as genetics, that are infused across all the applications on the platform, whether they're existing applications that we pre-configured or any new applications or processes that you configure. The first one we've already touched on, which is adaptability, which is the high level of configurability without programming. We have a whole set of settings that you can modify or even create new settings for your own new applications to manage your processes. But that's protected from future updates and upgrades, so there is no customization involved. Connectivity between processes. This is almost more important than the actual processes themselves, because in a quality management system, oftentimes one process or an issue, for example, might trigger a bunch of other things that have to happen. And we're actually going to be talking about that in just a few moments when I talk about the enhancing quality of your supply chain story. But connectivity allows you to launch processes from other processes. It allows you to inherit information from one form to another to essentially automate the process and reduce the amount of effort it takes to enter information. And it also provides linking back and forth between those related records for full traceability. So that connectivity genetic we'll be talking about and leaning on, and in fact, it'll make it extremely easy for me to do our demonstration because you'll see that I'll be able to link from one thing to another quite easily. In addition, we understand that you don't operate in a vacuum, or we don't operate in a vacuum. You have other systems that you need to integrate information from or push our information to from our system. Things like ERP systems or CRM systems or PLM tools, various other tools, HR tools to update your users on a regular basis. We provide industry standard mechanisms for integrating, once again, to achieve automation. Contextual awareness. This is the capability that allows our system to be implemented at a global level. So as the size of your organization increases, so does the complexity associated with that organization. All business units don't necessarily want to do things exactly the same way. And we can do what's called harmonize our system across your organization, where you can share common elements where it makes sense, things like keywords and certain fields on the form, or even the workflow processes. But you can also support either slight nuances or major differences in processes across the organization, while still ensuring everyone is in the same system globally. So you have a corporate governance perspective that you can manage across the entire organization. So contextual awareness allows you to define your organizational structure in the form of a hierarchy. And once you set that structure up, there's a field that's available on any form in the whole system, where the system knows when you log in as a user where you belong in that organization. Are you from a specific location, or are you a regional manager that has oversight over a business unit, or are you a corporate person that needs to see everything? So the system can automatically and dynamically filter information to ensure that you only see the information that you need. And that achieves 2 different things from a benefits perspective. From a security perspective, it makes sure that people can't see things that they're not supposed to see. And also from an ease of use perspective, it only shows people the information that they need to see instead of showing them all the stuff that could possibly exist across your growing organization or the large organization. Now, what's interesting about contextual awareness, and or otherwise known as that dynamic filtering that I mentioned a few moments ago, is that lends itself to the next capability, which is directly applicable to our discussion today about supply chain management and supply chain quality, because you can extend the hierarchy to include external users like suppliers and contractors. So when a supplier logs into the system could dynamically filter, and I'll show you an example of this when we get into the demonstration in a few minutes. The system can dynamically filter and only show them the information that pertains to them. So that means that you can take advantage of standard platform capabilities like assignments through workflow and reminders that get sent automatically, that can be sent to internal users as well as to external suppliers just as well. So this is very, very powerful to incorporate external users into the process. And because of the contextual awareness functionality, there are no security concerns because the system is locked down and they can only see the information that pertains to them. And then finally, the sixth genetic is called anywhere access, which means that you can access the system from anywhere. So you can use browsers on your mobile tablet, for example, like Firefox or Chrome. Our system has what's called responsive design to allow you to, the forms will dynamically change based on the size and shape and orientation of your screen. And we also have a mobility app that's available for Apple and Android devices. So there may be some situations where you want to go somewhere and have your phone, maybe conduct an audit even offline, which you can also do with the mobility app. Go audit a supplier. You download the audit from the web version onto your local mobile device. You take it offline, you go do your audit. You can use things like the camera on board to take pictures of the voice to text functionality to translate voice into text. And then you can upload the completed audit record and then launch any corrective actions and other issues that have to be launched from that as an output of that particular process. So I wanted to take a few moments to discuss these 6 platform genetics, because you'll probably notice that I'll refer to them during our demonstration and discussion. And it's also what makes our system so powerful and really peerless in this industry, because of the fact that there's nothing else that we're aware of out there that has this degree of power and flexibility to extend outside to your external collaboration suppliers as well. So that's the story that I wanted to tell about the different applications. So as far as the platform capabilities, so let's now discuss the story. So this is a 1-slide process overview that's animated to talk about the powerful connections between the processes. So the first thing we have in our system is this application that's called suppliers, materials, and chemicals. This allows you to track all your suppliers, all your contacts, any supplier documentation. It allows you to associate products and services that your supplier provides, and also allows you to synchronize with an ERP system, for example. So you might have SAP or JD Edwards or any other number of tools. We can integrate with virtually anything. And the idea is to have a single source of the truth. So you want to be able to, if you have an issue like a non-conformance report that has to be launched, you can do a lookup right from the NCMR record to the live list of suppliers and or products that come right from the suppliers, materials, and chemicals application. But in reality, that's also synchronizing with the single source of the truth, which is your ERP system. Now, as far as onboarding suppliers, you may want to conduct an audit, whether it's an onboarding qualification audit or ongoing surveillance audits. We have an application on the platform called Audits Management that allows you to manage those audits. As I just mentioned, you could use the mobility app to take those audits offline and work on them. So that's part of the onboarding of suppliers process. And also part of the qualification of your supplier's products, we do have another application that may or may not be applicable called Production Part Approval Process, or PPAP. So you can launch PPAPs in our system, but using the power of external collaboration, and that's why I took a few moments to introduce that, the concept of the genetics earlier, is that you can assign PPAPs right to your supplier using standard workflow, and they would then get an assignment that says we have to provide these things for this level of submission, and they would literally be able to provide those attachments, and they would be able to route the PPAP to the next step, which would assign it automatically to somebody internal to the organization. The standard reminders or escalation tool could be reminding suppliers of the fact that they have something that's due in a week or two or whatever number of days that you define. And it also allows you to have lists of all the outgoing or outstanding PPAPs and what is their current status. So there's clear visibility into what's happening. So that's the first side of it, which is onboarding and starting to do business with your suppliers. And once you are working with your suppliers, they can then start to provide you with the products and services that they provide to you. And you can do incoming inspections using any existing tool that you might have. So you might have a MES system or ERP system that allows you to do incoming inspection on those products. Or we also have our own application called Receiving and Inspection that's part of the system that's available that allows you to do receiving and inspection against your products and services with acceptance limits, with for quantitative and qualitative inspection requirements, etc. So you can integrate with that. So if you are using an external tool or whether you're using our own application, if an inspection identifies an issue, something is out of spec, you can click a button and launch a nonconformance, or through a real-time integration, it could push a nonconformance report into our system automatically. There's a workflow in place for that to do MRB, make a disposition decision, etc. But what I'm about to discuss is some of the power of the connectivity between different processes on the platform. Because not only is it really powerful that you can automatically launch a nonconformance report, but it's even better that you can do things like determine that the supplier is at fault and click a button and launch a supplier corrective action. Once again, allowing external collaboration with your supplier. So you can route the issue using standard workflow through the form, in the form of a SCAR in this case, to your supplier, and they would receive an email assigning it to them, and they would be able to see it on a list of assignments, and the due date would be tracked, etc. But in addition to launching a SCAR, you can also make other decisions. So for example, if you have a use as is disposition decision, you can choose to launch another type of a record in another application in our system called deviation or planned deviation. This is a workflow-based process that allows you to request a temporary change to the standard process. The workflow allows people to approve and review it based on how it was pre-configured by your own process. So the system would route it through your own business process. But then the next question becomes, now that we have to make a temporary change to a standard process, what's the best way to communicate that to our people in the facility or on the plant floor that need to know about that? And we have a very powerful solution to that, which is an integration with our document control application. So you might recall that one of the core applications is called document control, where you can create, review, approve, distribute, and revise documents in our system. So some users in your organization would be able to log into our system. Typically, we call them end users that are just on the plant floor, for example. They could log into our system and have a live list of all the currently approved versions of documents that they need to see. And that contextual awareness, as I discussed earlier, could dynamically filter and only show them what they need to see based on their location. But if there's a temporary change or deviation against that procedure, the deviation, once approved, will automatically show a message or flag every single document that's affected in document control that's identified from the deviation record. So if I'm just a typical end user going in to look at something, I know I'm going to see my most recently approved version of a document. It'll tell me that there's a deviation and even give me a link to that particular deviation. I can just click on that. And that's one of the scenarios I can actually demonstrate in just a couple of minutes when I get into the demo. In addition to launching a deviation and identifying all documents affected by that deviation, we can also, using connectivity, click a button and launch an internal corrective action. And as you can imagine, being that this is a core process in the quality management system, it has a very robust workflow for approval, for root cause analysis, for action planning, the ability to delegate actions to different people using standard workflow functionality, closed loop quality and connectivity to things that might have to be done as an output for those actions, whether it's attachments, whether it's links to other records like documents that are affected by the change that had to happen as a result of that issue, or training that had to be done in our training management application. So we'll touch on that a little bit during this discussion and demo as well. But the last thing I wanted to mention in the context of supply chain quality is that if you think about everything that's been happening here in this story, it's all been transactional on a day-to-day basis. You're launching nonconformances, you're conducting audits, you're associating it with suppliers and products. And we have another application that's part of our supply chain quality application set called supplier rating, which allows you to define what's called scoring profiles by type of product or commodity and say, for this type of product, this is the relative percentage of the score that's coming from audits and on-time delivery and non-conformances and SCARs. And it can incorporate external data from your ERP system as well. So what that does is it gives you the ability to do regular scheduled rating of your products and services, not just of your supplier, but every single product and service that your supplier is providing to you. And then there can be a feedback loop that takes place So if the rating changes, that can influence what happens on incoming inspection. You may do skip lot. You may modify your sampling plan. So what it does is it uses real-time information, business intelligence, if you will, to modify your behavior, not just your behavior, but other users that need to know, and saves you real time. So you're not wasting time, consistently inspecting something that you know, based on the past 5 receipts from that supplier, has been 100% good. So there's no reason to waste time on stuff if your rating is high. If it's low, you might want to lock down and even be more scrutinous of that product. So this is a very, very powerful connection in our system between all these different processes. So I wanted to take a moment to introduce this. And what I'm going to do now is do a live demonstration for a moment. And I'm going to start the demonstration with what it might look like for a typical user when they get assigned something. So based on the scenario that I just showed, there was an incoming inspection that launched a nonconformance report. So this is an assignment email to a nonconformance report. One thing about our system, and you'll see this very quickly, is that all the applications have exactly the same look and feel. So therefore, it's extremely comfortable for your users, once trained, to use additional processes. So this assignment email indicates what it is. It tells me the current step in the workflow. It tells me the due date. It could even have a description of the problem right in the body of the email, but then it has a hyperlink that brings me right to the record in question. And this, by the way, is exactly what a supplier would see if they were externally collaborating with your system as well. So they might see an assignment to a SCAR or to a PPAP. So when something gets assigned, standard workflow initially will send an assignment email to let you know that you have to do something, and then I can click on this link. And if I had single sign-on implemented, which our system is capable of doing, it would essentially log me in automatically because I'm already authenticated, and it would bring me right to the record in question. So this is what a typical record looks like within our system. I'm just going to blow this up a little bit so you have more real estate on the screen. So this is what every application looks like. We have the workflow at the top. These are the current steps. The step that this record is in right now is in the MRB step with the due date. I can see who it's assigned to. I can also see who routed it to me from the previous step of the workflow. So it identifies the person, the date and time, and their comment. So that's always visible. We have information on the form. We also have a navigator on the left side that lets me see different parts of the form. So I can see the supplier related to this issue. I can see the product related to this issue. So all of the forms are going to have the same look and feel. It just so happens that right now we're talking about the nonconformance form, right? So that's what happens when someone gets assigned something. I'm accessing this record. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through every single field on the form, but I will talk about a couple of important things. So for example, I mentioned the capability to integrate with your ERP system for a list of suppliers and products. So when someone first created this record, in this case, it came from a receiving inspection, so there's a link to that record, and this information was inherited automatically from the receiving record or the receiving inspection. But if someone had manually wanted to enter in a record and identify the supplier, they would be able to do a search and start typing the name, and they would be able to select it and say, okay, and then it would look up that supplier. So that's what I refer to when I talk about the integration capabilities with external systems. It would be similar for customers and similar for products. In this case, not only do we have the product identified, and which was also inherited from the receiving record, we have a picture of the product attached, and we also have a section down here that allows us to make a disposition decision. So the first question is, was the supplier at fault, yes or no? So if I say no, you notice that the form dynamically changes. If I say yes, it gives me what's called an action button that allows me to launch a SCAR. So you'll notice that this is a link to the SCAR and it's assigned to the supplier right now. So that will give me an opportunity to log in as that supplier. So just give me 1 second to switch to a different browser. So I'm logging in as Joe Smith from the company called Metal Depot. And Joe Smith has a home page, just like any other internal user would. But in this case, it's a very simple home page that only shows them a couple of things that are currently assigned. He's got a PPAP, he's got that SCAR that I just mentioned. The escalation tool will automatically track the upcoming due dates as they approach. This is a demo, so it's been sitting here for a little while. But as that due date approaches, level 1 of escalation might go to the person responsible, in this case to the supplier, maybe 5 days before it's due. and then 3 days later, it might send a reminder to the supplier, but also to the internal supplier quality engineer within your organization to let them know that someone's not responding in a timely manner. Now, just think about that for a second. The power of workflow with external collaboration allows you to collaborate with your supplier and communicate automatically, but also send reminders automatically. So if your mind isn't tied up worrying about those suppliers and having to go through manual spreadsheets and go through your email, you can be working on solving bigger problems than just worrying about following up with your supplier. So this collaboration concept is extremely powerful. The supplier can click on this, they can provide their response in the record, so they would be able to type the details down here, and then they would be able to click on the next step. And then what this would do is it would automatically route it based on predefined business rules to the person or group internal to your organization to verify what that supplier had done. Once again, that I would receive an email from the system with a hyperlink. It would show up on my homepage as an assignment. It would track my due date to make sure that it gets done. So I wanted to just bring that to your attention, but there are a couple of other things here about the homepage that I wanted to touch on, and it'll be really powerful if I discuss it from the supplier's concept. The supplier has the ability to easily access information in the system, once again, filtered based on that supplier. So the system comes pre-configured with these things called views, which are really reports that let me slice and dice information. We have about 350 pre-configured out of the box, but as an individual, that person can mark which views that they need to see right away. And as part of our user experience, and one of the 4 pillars that I mentioned earlier with visibility, we make it extremely easy to bookmark a couple of views that you use all the time to save you the time and effort it takes to get to the application and open up the view separately. So this is a list. This is what's called a view, and this is a list of all the issues, and in this case, the scars that are assigned to this one supplier. So as this particular supplier, these are the only ones that I can see. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing I can do, I might have access to my rating of products and services that's over in the supplier rating application. So this view, even though it's the same view for all suppliers, the system is dynamically filtering this information to only show this supplier their information. And just to drive that point home, I'm going to log in as a different supplier for a second. So this particular supplier has different assignments. They have a different list of scars assigned to them, as you can see, and their supplier rating in this case isn't as good as the other supplier. So I can see literally the current rating for every product and service that that supplier provides, and I can immediately see that there's some issues associated with that. So I wanted to bring that to your attention and literally show you what it might look like and how simple the interface is for external suppliers to be able to log in and access information. The other thing I'd like to point out while we're on this topic, in addition to the scar, we have the ability to disposition the nonconformance. So I'm back logged in as me, and as part of that use as is decision, there was initially an action button that let me launch a deviation. So rather than clicking on this link from here, what I'd like to do is, based on what I mentioned I would do during the scenario or the story, is if I log in as a typical end user within your own organization, this user has their own homepage. They have training assignments because, as I mentioned briefly, we have a very tight relationship in our system between document control and training. So when a document gets created or revised, it can be identified as a training requirement, and based on role or location or job position or department, you can define who has to be trained, and the system can allow them to either acknowledge their awareness of the document and or take a multiple choice test to verify that they read and understood it. In either of those 2 cases, the training assignments would sit right here. I would get an email from the system, I can do the assignment, I can take a test. If I pass the test, it marks it as a completed requirement. I can also bookmark documents that I use on a regular basis with one click right from the home page. Once again, an ease of use visibility consideration. And I can also see the master list of approved documents. In this case, this is dynamically filtering by my location. So this particular user is from the New Jersey location. So any document that's at this level, he can only see his location. Anyone else that logs in from other locations can only see the documents that are specific to their location and not the New Jersey documents. But in this case, if you think about document control, this person has access to business unit level documents as well as corporate level documents. So this allows you to have a very large organization. They all coexist in the same instance of the system, dynamically filtering but where it makes sense, they can still see the same common documentation that applies to everybody in the organization. This is a single source of the truth, and I just wanted to touch on that because it's one of the important contextual awareness considerations, and that's not really the scope of this discussion, but what I wanted to touch on was the ability to find a document, such as the material handling procedure, and if I click on it, there's a message that tells me that there's a deviation itself. If I wanted to get to the document itself, I can click on this, and it opens up the document for me. So this is the work instruction in this case, or the procedure. We can synchronize data with the header. We can also convert to PDF when it's approved so that users can only access the version that can't be modified. However, we also now have an active deviation against this document, as is indicated by this particular message, as is also indicated by this link. So this link allows me to access the deviation record, which is number 3, that was launched from nonconformance number 4. So you might remember when I showed the demo, the nonconformance record we were in was the same exact record. So this deviation is telling me what I have to do differently, whether it's text or attachments. And this deviation was tied to one or more documents over in document control, so that once the deviation got approved using workflow, and only once it got approved, does it message or provide messages automatically in all those related documents. So when it's in the final approval step, there is no message because it has not been approved yet. Once it's approved, it moves to active, then anyone that accesses any number of documents affected by a deviation will be able to see that that document has an active deviation. More powerful than that is when the deviation expires, the message automatically disappears. So that scenario of a temporary change to a standard process is something that we've seen many organizations struggle with. It's inefficiently communicated. It might be an email that gets sent, or a post-it note, or something else that's, we'd be surprised with what we've seen over the years. This is a very elegant way of incorporating almost surgically into the process that there's a temporary change. So I wanted to touch on that scenario as well. That came from the nonconformance report. So here's that link to the deviation. And then we also have the ability to do a risk assessment to assess the risk. And then ultimately we can launch a corrective action using that same connectivity capability. I'm just going to touch on this very quickly, as this is not really the focus of our demo today. But the corrective action workflow is, and by the way, everything we're touching, and it can be configured using our drag and drop designer. You can add fields to forms, modify workflows, have different types of workflows and different sections of forms that are applicable to different groups within the organization. So this allows us to, once approved, do a root cause analysis, and we can use one of several tools. We can define and propose an action plan, where we might want to say, okay, we're going to review documents that are related to this process because the nonconformance occurred, and we may want to review documents related to it, procedures, specifications, and we also may want to make sure that training is done on those documents. Once that action plan gets approved and the corrective action moves over to the implementation step, you'll notice that with one click, I can get to the corrective action application. This looks just like what we've seen before. This is an example of a view. I can search a view. I can see that there's another corrective action that's in the implementation step. And the reason I'm pointing this one out is because the action plan is tied to action items. So these action items got triggered automatically based on who needs to do it and what the due date was. So not only can our system communicate that there's an active action that they have to do, they would receive an email with a hyperlink to the record. It would show up on their homepage as an assignment. And since I have a lot of assignments, in this case, it breaks it up into folders. So I can see a link to that particular action item. Escalation is going to track the due date to remind me. This is the action itself, and I can track the objective evidence in several ways. Attachments, links. In this case, it's a link to the document that had to be revised over in document control as a result of that corrective action. And then right from here, we have the ability to identify a training course for who has to be trained. So I think, David, I'm going to stop there. I think that was a pretty good overview of the story. Yeah.
Very good, Tom. Thank you so much. That was really interesting because everything seems to be interconnected with everything else. So you can share this information very easily, both within your organization and outside of it.
That's the whole idea. It's in a quality management system, it's not just a set of siloed processes. It's really an equilibrium of processes that are occurring, and we can tie them all together, as I hope I was able to show very quickly, touching on 5 or 6 or even 8 different processes.
Definitely. And in fact, what we're going to do now is just talk a little bit about a couple of organizations that have put this into practice. So if we go to the first case study here, there's an organization called Wabtec. They make locomotives, they make trains, and they have ETQ Reliance as a QMS, but they also have quality control equipment. They have a hexagon QDOS system, for example, that takes measurements, has metrology information that goes through and is actually measuring components as they work their way through the assembly line. When you think about all the different suppliers you might have, and you build a product and you put it in the marketplace, if you have a failure in the marketplace, it's really hard to decide or to determine the root cause. And potentially if it was your fault, if it was the supplier's fault, which supplier, you get finger pointing. It gets really, really messy the later it is that you find the problem. So the idea is that you can find the problem as early as possible. So if you're on the assembly line and you have a part that's come from a supplier and it's out of tolerance or there's a problem with it, that's when you want to catch it. And that's what Wabtec has been able to do, is to prevent shipments before they occur. So you're not spending money doing rework in the field. You prevent shipments before they occur, so your customers are happier because they're only getting products that have the right level of quality. And you're driving revenue because you're not, your top line can go up because your customers are happier, but your bottom line goes up because you're not investing in all this rework and warranty work and everything else that goes along with it. So what Wabtec has been able to do is use everything Tom just talked about to catch problems earlier, work with their suppliers, and make sure that not only are they getting high quality products from the suppliers, but they're actually being able to charge back to the supplier when there's a problem, and knock on that supplier's door and say, you know, pay us money or give us a refund or whatever they need to do because the products weren't up to the specifications and the quality that Wabtec expected. The next case study is Rheem, and they are one of the largest producers of hot water heaters. With the quality management system, with Reliance, they've actually got their suppliers in the system, and it allows them to have a much more effective dialogue back and forth. And therefore, as you see on that first bullet, 50% reduction in time to complete supplier corrective actions. If you can cut the time in half, imagine what you can do, how much more you can get done, right? Audit findings go down. So not only is it the SCAR has been reduced, but now your audit findings have gone down, meaning you're saving more time. And they've reduced the number of non-conformances per year, supplier non-conformances per year, because they're working hand in hand with the supplier. And all of this has not only had a productivity impact for Rheem, look at what that's done for their annual inventory carrying costs. That's real money to the bottom line. $300,000 annually has been reduced. And at the same time, their customers are happier. So that is a second way that supplier quality management has really impacted an organization. And third, now we look at food and beverage, very different type of an approach or type of an organization, but they have suppliers too, right? You've got your produce providers, you've got your meat providers, their bread and everything. So, right, they're bringing it all together. In some respects, they're a system integrator, right? Just it's a sandwich that they're integrating. And so making sure that they can react to the market very quickly, onboard suppliers, make changes to suppliers, especially these days with supply chain disruption, has with ETQ Reliance, they're able to basically turn on a dime and onboard new suppliers and get suppliers up to speed more quickly because they have their specifications all baked into Reliance, and they're just available, and they can train their suppliers on the whole idea of supply chain quality. So that's just three quick examples of how organizations are using ETQ Reliance for supply chain quality. Now, at this point, Tom, I think we are about ready for questions.
I think so. I just
So
was going to mention, unfortunately, I haven't had lunch yet, so this picture on the left is making me kind of hungry just by looking at
yeah,
this
I would,
neighborhood.
yes, it does that. It looks really good. So let's, all right. So we do have a few questions that have come in, and we thank you for that. And, while we're answering the questions, Tom, if you just jump to the next slide, if you need additional, would like to see more, here's some additional resources, but let's go ahead and take a look at the questions that have come in. And the first one is pretty good. So first one I see here is we've talked about suppliers actually getting access to the system, Tom, and to get and utilize scars of nonconformance. How do you get access?
Well, they're simply set up as a user, and we have a way of automating it through the profile for that supplier. And because the system is hosted in the cloud, it's not going to there are no concerns about firewall issues, or your IT folks aren't going to have any concerns about access to information behind your firewall. And that user would just receive a welcome to ETQ Reliance email based on the email address that you enter into their profile. They would be able to set their password, and then from that point forward, they would be associated with that supplier, and then anything that gets assigned to that supplier, the way it was configured, would send them an assignment email, and they can participate in the workflow. So it's very easy to incorporate external users into the system.
Okay, and let me just say to everybody on the call still, while we're going through the Q&A, if you have any questions, as I said, please use the GoToWebinar widget on the right-hand side of the screen and enter in your question. All right, the next question is from James. And first of all, thank you, Jacob, for that first question. James wants to know, instead of just a SCAR, can you send any sort of other type of supplier notification?
Absolutely. Once the supplier is set up as a user, they can participate in any process, change requests, deviations, any business process on the platform, or even anything that you configure onto the platform, because the infrastructure is there and the security is there.
Okay. Another question, and this relates to emails. Can multiple emails be applied to one user?
No.
Do you know? No.
No.
Okay. All right.
Nope.
And then
we do have push notification for mobility, though. Keep that in mind. So if you're using the mobility app, there's a setting that lets you define push notifications. So when you get a text message or an email, the way on your phone, you get that message on the top that comes down, it would be exactly the same. So there is another mode to receive a notification.
Okay, great. And then Rolando asks, how does licensing work with suppliers? Do you need to have a separate supplier license?
So David, do you want to address that? Because I think we're changing that shortly, right?
So actually, you don't need to have a separate supplier license. You just have your suppliers log in as any other user on the system, and they can get access. And so we work with you to make sure that you have the right number of users licensed for the system. That's something that we can help make sure that nobody goes away unable to get access if needed. But we do work with you to make sure that you have the right number of licenses.
David, one more thing that we need to mention on the back of that is that it's a concurrent license model. So you don't have to license each user. You license how many people can log into the system at once, which is perfect for suppliers because they're so infrequently going to be logging into the system that you'd be surprised how few concurrent users you might need to be able to support a relatively large number of suppliers and their access to the system.
That's a great point. That in fact, you don't need to license every single supplier and pay for a license for every single supplier all at the same time. Next question comes from Crystal. Can you explain how the incoming inspection module application connects with the supplier scorecards?
Sure. It's the same way other applications do. There is a setting, I mentioned it before, called a scoring profile that lets you define by type of product or commodity what relative percentage of the score comes from different sources. So the supplier quality, the supplier receiving inspection, could be just one of what could be 5 or 6 or 7 other data sources. And you can define a percentage and how it gets calculated in the system. So we'd be happy to set up a discussion and go into more detail if you want to demonstrate that at some point. I don't know that we have time to go into that right this second.
Okay. Again, if you have any questions, just please feel free to drop them into the Q&A area on the GoToWebinar widget. At this point, doesn't look like we have any more questions. I don't know, Tom, if there's anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap up here.
No, other than thank you very much for attending today, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions, and we're more than happy to set up more detailed discussions with you about how we can bring this to the table for you in the future.
Great, thank you, Tom. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This has been wonderful, and we appreciate your joining us. This, as I said, is the first in a series of product-focused webinars that we are going to be doing. So stay tuned, and we will be back with you to talk about the next webinar shortly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.